The Three Astronauts by Umberto Eco and Eugenio Carmi.
Once upon a time there was Earth, and once upon a time there was Mars. They were very far apart in the midst of the sky, and all around them were millions of planets and millions of galaxies. The people who lived on Earth wanted to reach Mars and the other planets, but the planets were very far away. All the same, the people set to work. First, they launched satellites that circled Earth for 2 days, then came back again. Then they launched rockets, but instead of coming back down, the rockets escaped the pull of Earth's gravity and went off into infinite space. At first, they put dogs in the rockets, but the dogs couldn't talk, and the only message they sent over the radio was, "Bow wow!" and nobody could figure out what the dogs had seen or what places they had reached. Finally, they found some brave men who wanted to be astronauts. Astronauts explore the stars, infinite space, the planets and galaxies, and everything all around them. They took off not knowing if they would come back. Because Earth had become too crowded, and there were more and more people on it every day, the astronauts wanted to conquer the stars so that one day everybody would be able to travel from one planet to another. One fine morning, 3 rockets took off from 3 different places on Earth. In the first, there was an American, happily whistling a bit of jazz. In the second, there was a Russian, singing the song of the vulgar boatman. In the third, there was a Chinese, singing a beautiful song, though the other two thought he was all out of tune. Each wanted to be the first man to set foot on Mars, because he wanted to show that he was the best. It so happened that the American didn't like the Russian, and the Russian didn't like the Chinese, and the Chinese was suspicious of the other 2. This was because the American, to greet somebody, said, "How do you do?" and the Russian said, "Zdravstvuyte," and the Chinese said, "Ni hao." They didn't understand one another, and each thought the other 2 were peculiar. Since all 3 of them were very smart, they landed on Mars at almost the same time. They got out of their spaceships, wearing their helmets and their spacesuits, and they found a marvelous and disturbing landscape. The ground was striped by long canals full of emerald green water. There were trees of a strange blue, with birds such as no one had ever seen, their feathers of an equally strange color. On the horizon there were red mountains that gave off eerie flashes. The astronauts looked at the landscape. They looked at one another distrustfully, and each kept his distance. Then night fell. There was a curious silence all around, and Earth shone in the sky as if it were a distant star. The astronauts felt sad and lost, and in the darkness the American called for his mother. "Mummy," he said, and the Russian said, "Mamachka," and the Chinese said, "Mama." But they realized almost at once that they were saying the same thing and feeling the same feelings. So they smiled at one another, moved closer, and together lit a nice little fire, and each sang the songs of his home country. Their spirits were raised, and, as they waited for morning, they got to know one another. Finally, morning came. It was very cold. Suddenly, from a clump of trees, a Martian appeared. He was truly horrible to look at, green all over, with a pair of antennae instead of ears, a trunk, and 6 arms. He looked at them and said, "Grrr!" which in his language meant, "My goodness, who are these horrible creatures?" But the Earthlings didn't understand him, and believed he had uttered a war growl. He was so different from them, they weren't able to understand him or love him. All 3 immediately felt like fighting him. Now that they were faced with this monster, their little differences vanished. What did it matter if they spoke different languages? They realized that all 3 of them were human beings. But this other one wasn't. He was too ugly, and the Earthlings thought that anybody who was ugly was also bad. So they decided to kill him with their atomic disintegrators. But suddenly, in the great cold of the morning, a Martian baby bird, in leaving its nest, fell to the ground, shivering with cold and fear. It cheeped desperately, more or less like a little bird on Earth. It was heartbreaking. The American, the Russian, and the Chinese looked at it and couldn't help shedding a tear of pity. At that moment, something strange happened. The Martian went over to the bird, looked at it, and puffed 2 jets of smoke from his trunk. And the Earthlings all at once realized that the Martian was crying in his own Martian way. Then they saw him bend over the little bird and pick it up in his 6 arms, trying to warm it. The Chinese turned towards his 2 friends from Earth. "You see," he said, "we thought this monster was different from us, but he likes animals too, and he can cry. He has a heart, and surely he has a brain as well. Do you still think we should kill him?" There was really no need to ask. The Earthlings had learned their lesson by now. Just because 2 creatures are different, they don't have to be enemies. So each went over to the Martian, with his hand extended. And since the Martian had 6, he could shake hands with all 3 men at once, and at the same time he could wave joyfully with his other hand. And, pointing to Earth up there in the sky, he indicated that he would like to take a trip, to meet the Earthlings, and to figure out with them the way to found a great republic of space where everybody could live happily ever after. Delighted, the astronauts said yes. And to celebrate the occasion, they offered him a little bottle of cool water they had brought from Earth. Overjoyed, the Martian stuck his trunk into the bottle and inhaled a healthy swig. Then he announced that he liked this drink a lot, even though it went to his head. And so the visitors realized that on Earth, and on the other planets too, each one has his ways, and it's simply a matter of reaching an understanding.